They spit in your food today. Those 4 words, scrawled in shaky handwriting on a folded napkin, hit harder than any breaking headline. They stopped Billionaire CEO Malcolm Devo mid-bite, the fork frozen inches from his lips. For a man who had weathered stock market collapses, corporate betrayals, and public scrutiny, this was something different. This wasn't a deal gone wrong or a business rival plotting his downfall. This was personal, and it was about to unravel into a dark, explosive story that would shake the very foundation of an industry. Malcolm hadn't come to the cradle for its famous steak. He came in disguise, a plain navy hoodie, scuffed sneakers, and no hint of the billionaire beneath. He was here on a mission, investigating the whispers that had reached his office weeks earlier. An anonymous letter had accused one of his own high-end restaurants nestled in Charleston, South Carolina, of racial bias and disturbing kitchen behavior. He couldn't ignore it, so he didn't send lawyers or PR agents. He came himself, quietly, alone. From the moment he walked in, he felt it. The tension wasn't imagined. The rumors weren't rumors anymore. He was seated near the restroom, an unspoken signal, and left waiting, invisible, for 10 long minutes. The server passed his table again and again, eyes sliding right past him. And then came the napkin. The note was slipped under his coffee cup by a young waitress, her eyes trembling with fear, her shoes worn thin from long shifts. Her name was Naomi. She didn't beg for help. She didn't even look back. She just told the truth, quietly, dangerously. That truth cracked through the polished surface of a restaurant built on charm and deception. This story isn't just about food. It is about courage, about what happens when one person risks everything to expose what others hide. It's about the invisible chains of racism still woven into places of privilege, and how one woman's bravery would force a reckoning. This is a black story, and if you've ever wondered how justice truly begins, it starts right here. Before we dive deeper, make sure to like this video and subscribe for more powerful true stories. Stories that make you think, that make you feel, and that challenge the world as it is. Now take a breath, because what you are about to hear in the next 10 minutes will forever change the way you look at power, privilege, and what happens when a single napkin becomes a weapon of truth. Malcolm Devo wasn't a man who reacted with emotion. He had mastered silence, turned it into strategy. At 46, he was one of the most respected black CEOs in America, a former tech prodigy turned billionaire investor. His empire wasn't built on luck, but on precision. Every sentence he spoke was deliberate. Every decision, calculated. He didn't believe in coincidence, only in discipline, data, and dignity. But no algorithm could prepare him for the sentence Naomi had written on that napkin. Malcolm knew too well the cost of being underestimated. He'd grown up in a small Alabama town, raised by his grandmother while his mother worked endless cleaning jobs just so her son could walk into school with clean clothes. His first computer came from a church donation box. His first real investment, a scholarship fund he built at 24, came from the profits of a startup he'd launched in his garage. But success doesn't erase the past. It only buries it beneath polished glass. On paper, Malcolm was now the founder of Devo Capital Holdings, with business interests stretching across clean energy, fintech, and luxury hospitality. He drove a black Tesla, served on multiple corporate boards, and lived in a glass-walled penthouse overlooking Central Park. But behind the closed doors, he was still that kid who, once learned to tie a tie from a YouTube video before pitching to investors. No gold watches, no designer labels. Malcolm understood how fast people judged a black man. By his clothes, by his silence, by his very presence. Long before they ever judged his words. So when that anonymous letter landed on his desk 2 weeks earlier, he didn't send an assistant. He bought a Greyhound ticket, pulled up his hood, and went to see the truth for himself. When he stepped into the cradle that night, no one recognized him. And that was exactly the point. Because sometimes, to see what's real, you have to blend into the background. Malcolm wasn't just a CEO tonight. He was a mirror, ready to show a system its own reflection, raw, unfiltered, and ugly. The Cradle wasn't just any restaurant. It was a temple of quiet power. Housed inside a restored Charleston mansion, its golden glow and velvet-draped rooms whispered exclusivity. The air itself felt expensive. Crystal chandeliers, soft jazz, candlelight that made every face look more important. People didn't come here to eat. They came to be seen. The walls carried portraits of Confederate generals, unlabeled, romanticized, as if dim lighting could rewrite history. The restaurant's name, The Cradle, came from Charleston's title as the Cradle of Southern Elegance, or so the website boasted. But to Malcolm, that word meant something else. The cradle of exclusion. The cradle of control. The hostess, a young white woman with perfect posture and a rehearsed smile, looked him up and down like she was scanning for danger. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked flatly. "No," Malcolm replied calmly. She sighed, annoyance thinly disguised as professionalism. "We're fully booked tonight, sir. But I might be able to seat you near the kitchen if that's acceptable." "That works," Malcolm said. He followed her through a dining room glowing with wealth. Tables of white patrons in tailored suits, designer gowns, laughter polished and practiced. Not a single black diner in sight. Only black staff moving silently between tables, serving plates they could never afford to taste. She seated him near the service doors, where the smell of bleach crept through each time they swung open. No candle, no warmth, just a menu placed like an afterthought. As Malcolm scanned the room, the truth became clear. This wasn't a restaurant. It was a reflection of America itself, polite on the surface, poisonous underneath. The servers smiled brighter for Rolex wrists and country club laughter. The manager, a middle-aged white man with slicked-back hair, moved between tables like a politician collecting votes. The room buzzed softly with the hum of privilege, the clink of silver, the low murmur of polished laughter. Hands shook, smiles flashed, and voices rose just enough to be overheard by the right people. But the manager's eyes drifted right past Malcolm as if he were invisible. The Cradle wasn't malfunctioning. It was doing exactly what it was built to do, to separate, to rank, to remind. Malcolm didn't need a speech or a headline to see it. This wasn't fine dining. It was theater, a stage where history hid behind candlelight and called itself tradition. Across the room, Naomi Brooks moved with the silence of someone who had learned long ago that survival depended on not being noticed. At 25, she carried the calm of someone older, the kind of quiet that comes from weathering too many storms. There was a depth to her eyes, soft but sharp, like a blade hidden beneath silk. Once, she had dreamed of becoming a civil rights attorney, halfway through her law degree at Howard University, but life had other plans. Her mother's sudden cancer diagnosis left her facing a choice between family and ambition. The bills rose faster than her scholarships could keep up. She packed her textbooks away, left D.C., and returned home to Charleston. The first job that didn't ask too many questions was at the Cradle. The pay was decent. The atmosphere was suffocating. Naomi was the only black waitress on staff. Nobody said the words out loud, but she could feel them in every subtle cruelty. The shifts she didn't ask for, the tables no one else wanted, the blame that somehow always landed on her shoulders. She wore politeness like armor. "Yes, sir. Of course, ma'am." Every smile was a shield, every apology, a defense. But even armor begins to crack under constant fire. She had learned to read the room, the way Mr. Clay, the restaurant's manager, looked at her as if she were part of the furniture. The snide laughter from co-workers when she got stiffed on a tip. The chef's so-called jokes about serving leftovers to the black tables. She never laughed. She just filed it all away, a growing ledger of quiet wrongs. Naomi wasn't fragile. She was patient. She was watching. And tonight, something felt different. The man at table 14 didn't fit the Cradle's pattern. He didn't flaunt wealth or demand attention. He didn't carry himself like someone who needed to prove anything. He just sat there, calm, composed, observant. When Naomi approached, he looked up and met her gaze directly. No glance, no judgment. A real look. The kind that said, "I see you." That moment, tiny, silent, human, cracked something open inside her. Naomi wasn't just a waitress tonight. She was a witness to every slur muttered behind polished smiles, to every mistake that somehow always happened to the same kind of customer, to every policy that changed depending on skin tone. And tonight, she was done pretending not to see. The presidential prime wasn't just a steak. It was a symbol. 48 ounces of bone-in Wagyu, dry-aged for 90 days, smoked under a rosemary dome and revealed with theatrical flourish. Served beside truffle-whipped potatoes and a $700 price tag. It was the restaurant's crown jewel. The dish that screamed, "This is power." When Malcolm ordered it, Naomi froze for half a second. "You'd like the presidential prime?" she repeated, her voice steady though her pulse quickened. He nodded. Medium rare, and a glass of the 2005 Staglin Cabernet. Another $200 choice, made with the calm of a man ordering black coffee. Naomi had taken that order dozens of times before, always from hedge fund brokers, senators, influencers flashing platinum cards, never from someone in sneakers and a hoodie, never from someone seated near the kitchen doors. She felt eyes on her. Across the room, Mr. Clay stood watching, arms crossed, lips pursed in disapproval. His stare said everything his mouth didn't. Don't waste your time. Men like him don't belong here. She hesitated for a fraction too long. Is that a problem? Malcolm's tone was soft, but the edge beneath it was sharp enough to cut. No, sir, she said quickly. Coming right up. She turned away, her heart hammering. Every server at the Cradle knew the unspoken rule. If a customer didn't look wealthy and ordered something expensive, management demanded a credit card first. No exceptions. But Naomi broke the rule. She punched in the order like she'd done 100 times. No hesitation this time. When the system flashed red, demanding manager approval, she hit override and swiped her own ID. She'd just taken financial responsibility for a $700 meal and a $200 bottle of wine. On instinct. Behind her, Mr. Clay's voice echoed down the hallway, dripping with irritation. Did he pay up front? No, sir, she replied without turning around. Then you better pray he does, he growled. But Naomi wasn't praying. She was planning. Because something in her gut told her this man wasn't here to eat. He was here to see. And if that was true, then tonight he was going to see everything. She'd seen things in that kitchen that would make a customer lose their appetite. But what happened next would burn into her memory forever. As the presidential prime sizzled on the grill, the head chef, Rick, a man known more for his arrogance than his talent, leaned over the steak with a smirk that chilled her blood. Then, in one quick, revolting motion, he spat on the meat. He flipped it over like nothing had happened. The sous chef chuckled, and Naomi felt the last thread of her silence snap. Naomi froze. Her body went rigid, her breath caught halfway in her throat. Her mind tried to explain it away. Maybe she'd misread what she saw. Maybe it was an accident, a trick of the light. But then she heard it. The sound that crushed denial flat, the low, careless laughter from the kitchen staff. It wasn't new. It wasn't shocking to them. It was routine. And the steak, the presidential prime, was already plated. Heat surged beneath her skin. Not the heat of the grill, but the kind that burns from the inside, the kind that demands a scream. But she couldn't. Not yet. If she said a single wrong word, she'd lose everything. And maybe he would too. She looked through the kitchen doors toward the dining room. Malcolm still sat there, calm as stone, a man apart from the noise around him. He hadn't touched his wine, hadn't fidgeted, hadn't moved. But his eyes, they were sharp, watchful. They didn't know who he was, but Naomi was beginning to guess. And that changed everything. She had seconds to make a choice. Say nothing and serve that tainted steak to a man who might have the power to change everything here, or risk her job, her safety, and maybe her future to tell him the truth. Her fingers twitched. Then she moved. From her apron pocket, she pulled out her black service pen and snatched a clean linen napkin from the rack. Her hands trembled as she wrote, the ink dragging unevenly across the fine thread. They spit in your food. This place is not safe. Ask to see the kitchen cameras. No name, no signature, just truth, folded small enough to fit in the palm of her hand. She slid the napkin into her pocket, just as the domed silver plate was handed to her. The smell of seared meat hit her nose, now tainted by disgust. Her pulse thundered in her ears as she carried it across the dining room, each step louder than the last. Malcolm looked up when she approached. With practiced composure, she set the plate before him, lifted the dome, and murmured softly, "Enjoy your meal, sir." He nodded once, and as she gathered the empty bread plate with her right hand, her left hand moved like smoke, sliding the folded napkin just beneath the corner of his place setting. Then she was gone, disappearing into the rhythm of service as if nothing had happened. No eye contact, no pause, just the quiet hope that the man at table 14 would know how to read a warning written in cloth. Malcolm sat there for a long time, unmoving, the napkin untouched before him. He hadn't picked up his knife, hadn't even looked at the steak. Something in Naomi's eyes had told him to wait, something urgent, wordless, desperate. He could feel it in the tightness of her breath and the tremor of her hand. Finally, he reached forward, slowly, deliberately. He unfolded the napkin. The words stared back at him, crooked and trembling, but clear. They spit in your food. This place is not safe. Ask to see the kitchen cameras. His jaw clenched. His pulse steadied into something cold and precise. It wasn't the act itself that shocked him. He had seen worse in his years undercover, testing his own companies, testing people's morality. It was that second sentence, "This place is not safe." That was bigger, deeper. That was a system rotting from the inside out. Naomi wasn't just warning him, she was sounding an alarm. He folded the napkin once more, slid it into the inside pocket of his hoodie, and pushed the untouched plate away. No scene, no shout, no sudden move. He reached for his phone, not his usual one, but the old burner he carried for quiet investigations, and opened a secure app. A few quick taps later, a coded message was sent to his head of security in New York. Red flag at the cradle. Pull kitchen camera backups for tonight. Cross-check staff records, quiet, fast, full report. Then Malcolm rose from his seat. Across the room, Mr. Clay, the manager, spotted him and straightened, smiling in that way only men trained in fake hospitality can. "Everything all right, sir?" he asked, eyes darting toward the plate, still untouched. Malcolm's voice was smooth, calm, unbothered. "I'd like to speak with you privately, about the meal." "Of course, sir," Clay replied, gesturing toward a hallway lined with framed awards and carefully printed certificates, all image, no substance. They entered the office. Malcolm didn't sit. Clay began his usual speech, something about commitment to excellence, guest satisfaction, and culinary precision. It was a blur of meaningless words. Malcolm's face didn't move. When Clay paused for breath, Malcolm spoke, his voice cutting through the air like a blade. "I want to see your kitchen cameras, right now." Clay blinked. I beg your pardon?" "You heard me," Malcolm replied evenly. And in that moment his demeanor shifted. The disguise fell away. The CEO had entered the room. Clay hesitated. Too long. "The kitchen cameras," he stammered. "They're mostly for inventory tracking, not for, guest concerns." Malcolm didn't blink. "That's fine. Let's start with tonight's footage. Specifically the time my steak was being prepared." Clay's throat bobbed. He shifted, buying time. "I'd, have to get approval. The system only archives in 30-minute blocks, and, some of the feeds loop automatically when storage fills, so it's possible that—" "Stop." Malcolm's voice sliced through his excuses. "I'm giving you one chance to do this clean," he said quietly. You can be the man who helped expose a problem inside his own house, or the one who buried it. Clay's color drained. He swallowed hard. Sir, may I ask, who exactly are you? Malcolm leaned forward just enough for the truth to land heavy. I'm the man who signs your checks, and if I hear one more lie, you won't have another one to cash. Clay's mouth opened, then closed again. His hands shook as he turned toward the cabinet, fumbling for a small silver key. He opened a drawer, pulled out a dusty external drive, and plugged it into the office monitor. The screen flickered to life. Footage rolled, fragmented, grainy from a high-corner camera. The prep station came into view. Malcolm folded his arms. Clay clicked forward. The footage moved smoothly, then abruptly jumped. A skip, a cut, not a glitch, a clean edit. And Malcolm's face went still as stone. Exactly 2 minutes and 12 seconds. That was the gap, the missing window between one camera feed and the next. Right when Naomi would have been waiting on the order. Right when the steak was plated. Mr. Clay's finger hovered over the keyboard, pretending to tap again, to act busy, to act confused. Malcolm stopped him with a single word. Enough. Outside the office, the restaurant buzzed on, forks clinking, laughter bubbling, glasses chiming. Inside, silence carved the air like a scalpel. Malcolm pulled out his phone, typed a brief encrypted message. Partial footage, possible tampering. Flag Clay. Interview staff. Preserve all files. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and looked up at the man sweating through his dress shirt. You're done for tonight, Malcolm said quietly. Walk me out, then go home. And if you're smart, call a lawyer. Clay didn't move. He didn't know it yet, but the storm had already broken, and he was standing dead center in its eye. The drive. The ride back to Malcolm's hotel was a blur of headlights and silence. No music, no calls. He didn't need noise, he needed focus. By the time he reached his suite, his security team had already delivered. Backup feeds. Pulled directly from the cloud. Raw. Unedited. Unforgiving. He sat at the desk, poured a glass of water, and pressed play. The footage was crystal clear. Chef Rick leaned over the presidential prime. No hesitation, no distraction. Just a deliberate act, a slow spit, a satisfied grin, then a joke to the sous chef. Laughter followed. The audio caught the words just loud enough to chill the blood. That's what you get for acting like you belong here. Malcolm leaned back, expression blank. There was no shock, no anger, just clarity. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a bad night. It was a culture, a quiet, polished machine built to humiliate anyone who didn't fit their idea of belonging. He scrolled back, another clip, another week, a black couple in the back corner, waiting 30 minutes for their food. In the kitchen, laughter again. Rick tossed a steak onto the floor, flipped it back onto the grill, smirking. Not random, not rare. Policy in disguise. Malcolm hit save, encrypting everything into 2 separate servers. One routed to legal, the other to PR. The message was short and sharp. Full internal review, staff interrogations, emergency ethics audit, silence until green light. He set the phone down and looked out at the Charleston skyline, its lights glimmering like a city too proud to notice its own cracks. They had tried to humiliate him. They had failed. Instead, they'd exposed something rotten, something far bigger than a plate of steak. This was no longer about a meal. This was about justice, and someone very soon was going to answer for it, on camera, under oath, and without warning. The next morning, Naomi barely slept. Every minute since she'd slipped that napkin felt like a countdown. She'd imagined the fallout 100 ways. Anger, accusations, maybe even police. So when she pushed open the back door of the cradle the next morning, she braced for it. But nothing came. No cold stares, no whispers. Just silence. Until the hostess passed her quietly and whispered, "Mr. Clay's office now." Naomi froze. She didn't even clock in, just tightened her apron and walked that long hallway, her heartbeat echoing louder than her footsteps. She expected Clay, maybe HR, maybe security, but not him. Malcolm was standing by the desk. Same hoodie, same calm, same unreadable eyes. Except now there was a weight in the room that hadn't been there before. "Naomi Brooks," he said, motioning to the chair across from him. She sat slowly. I shouldn't have," she began, voice trembling. He raised a hand. "You should have," Malcolm said. "And you did." Her breath hitched. "Am I being fired?" He shook his head. "Not by me." Naomi blinked, confused. "I own this place," he said. "The building, the brand, every person who works here answers to me." The air left her lungs. She sank deeper into the chair. "I've seen what happened," Malcolm continued. "Not just last night, but for months, maybe years." "I didn't know who else to tell," Naomi whispered. "And you didn't have to," he said. "You did more than most people ever would." He paused, then leaned forward. "So here's the truth. I could shut this place down today, fire everyone, change the name, start from zero. And maybe I still will. But before I do, I want one thing from you." Naomi's throat tightened. "A choice?" He nodded. "Exactly. You can walk away quietly. I'll make sure you're protected. A scholarship, a new start, whatever you need." She blinked, unsure what to say. "Or," Malcolm said softly, "you can stay. Help me rebuild this place from the inside out. Start from scratch. As the new director of ethics and culture." The words hung between them like a promise. Naomi's voice cracked. "You really trust me with that?" Malcolm smiled faintly. "I already did. You just didn't know it yet." And for the first time in a long time, Naomi exhaled, not in fear, but in freedom. 1 year later. Touching stories, ending. 24 hours later, the Cradle was no longer just a restaurant. It was a crime scene dressed in tuxedos. Lawyers flew in. Contracts burned. Cameras rolled. By noon, the internet had a new headline. "Billionaire CEO exposes racist fine dining ring. Waitress sparks reform." And somewhere behind those flashing screens, Naomi Brooks stood beside Malcolm, clipboard in hand, overseeing a team of new hires, diverse, driven, and trained under her code. The restaurant reopened under a new name. Its motto, carved into the wall where the old awards used to hang, "Respect is the only ingredient that never spoils." And for once, everyone there, from the CEO to the servers, finally understood what that meant. Malcolm's PR team was already drafting the public statement, but he had no plans to hide behind rehearsed lines or polished headlines. Not this time. At exactly 12:30 p.m., 2 black SUVs rolled to a stop in front of the Cradle. Inside, the lunch crowd had just begun to settle, silverware clinking, polite laughter floating through the air. Then the doors opened. 2 plainclothes federal agents stepped inside, calm and precise. No raised voices, no warnings. They didn't need to. They headed straight for the kitchen. Chef Rick didn't make it 3 steps before he was handcuffed and led through the same doors where he once barked orders. His stained apron still hung from his neck. The sous chef followed next. Then finally, Mr. Clay. 3 arrests, 1 day. No second chances. The restaurant froze. Some employees stood in shock. Others quietly clapped. A few just watched, mouths parted, as the men who had once ruled the place were escorted out like thieves caught mid-shift. Outside, Malcolm stood at a podium newly set on the front steps. Reporters crowded around, mics lifted, cameras flashing, but he didn't raise his voice. He didn't dramatize it. He spoke with quiet precision, the kind that cuts deeper than anger ever could. "Yesterday, I walked into this restaurant as a customer. Today, I stand here as its owner. And what I saw inside these walls, what I uncovered, does not represent the values of Devo Holdings, or this community." He paused, his gaze sweeping the sea of faces before him. This wasn't one bad apple. It was a rotten tree. And we're cutting it down, Then he turned slightly, gesturing toward Naomi, standing just behind him in a simple navy blouse and pressed slacks. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just stood tall, quiet strength embodied. "This woman," Malcolm said, "showed more integrity in a single night than most executives show in their entire careers. She is the reason this truth came to light, and she is the reason this place will have a future." Naomi's throat tightened. The applause that followed wasn't routine or polite. It was real. It carried weight. Malcolm closed his remarks with one last line, short, sharp, and unforgettable. "We're not canceling the cradle. We're rebuilding it. And this time, it's going to serve more than food. It's going to serve justice. No PR spin. No filters. Just truth. Finally out in the open. Rebuilding the cradle." Naomi had never worn a suit jacket that cost more than her rent. Until now. 2 weeks after the arrests, the cradle remained closed to the public. But inside, everything had changed. The kitchen was gutted. The walls repainted. Uniforms redesigned. Every Confederate-era portrait gone, replaced with framed photographs of Charleston's unsung black pioneers, chefs, artists, educators, and activists who had shaped the city but never made the front pages. And at the center of it all sat Naomi Brooks, at a desk that once belonged to Mr. Clay. She wasn't too used to the title yet, Director of Ethics and Culture. It sounded formal, heavy, but Malcolm had explained it to her differently. "It's not about policy," he said. "It's about presence." Naomi wasn't there to just sign paperwork or show up for ribbon cuttings. She was there to rebuild trust, to turn the ashes of humiliation into a foundation of respect. On her first official day, she called a meeting. No suits, no speeches, just a circle of chairs in the dining room. Some employees couldn't meet her eyes, others whispered, but most listened. She told them everything, not with bitterness but with courage. She explained why the culture had failed, why silence is never neutral, and how they were going to do better, together. She built a new reporting system for staff, introduced weekly bias training, and hired new managers, people who looked like the communities they served. She turned that restaurant into a classroom for compassion. And she did one more thing. Naomi went back to school. Malcolm had promised to cover her tuition if she ever wanted to finish her law degree, and she said yes. Night classes, weekends, long shifts in between, because justice didn't stop at one restaurant. It started there. But Naomi didn't walk like a student anymore. She walked like someone who had stepped through fire and come out clear. Her co-workers began to ask questions, real ones. Not just about policy, but about belonging, about dignity, about courage.